it's been 7 years, and I will finally get to see ArthroFree be in that operating room, be used by our surgeons. And I'm going to see it start to provide those benefits that I saw the need for 7 years ago. That it's just an indescribable feeling.
Let's discover the Cleveland entrepreneurial ecosystem. We are telling the stories of its entrepreneurs and those supporting them. Welcome to the Lay of the Land podcast, where we are exploring what people are building in Cleveland. I am your host, Jeffrey Stern, and today I had the absolute pleasure of speaking with Eugene Malinskiy about the future of healthcare and of the operating room. Eugene is the co-founder and CEO of Lazurite, which got its start back in 2015. And to date, Eugene has led Lazurite through 3 rounds of funding, raising more than $18 million for the company. As you'll hear in his incredible recounting of the experience firsthand, Eugene founded Lazurite after identifying the need for a wireless arthroscope while working at his prior venture, DragonID, when he witnessed a trip and fall accident in a minimally invasive operating room where a staff member was injured as the result of her tripping over surgical camera wires, and the surgery itself was canceled. This incident left a lasting impression on Eugene and inspired the ArthroFree wireless surgical camera system, which will be Lazurite's first product to market. Prior to Lazurite, Eugene founded and served as CEO of DragonID, a healthcare innovation and engineering consultancy specializing in medical devices for the fields of cardiology and orthopedics. While at DragonID, Eugene not only incubated the idea behind Lazurite, but he also earned a number of accolades, including being named to Forbes 30 Under 30. Even before his time with DragonID, Eugene began his entrepreneurship journey when he founded and ran Dragon IntelliNet Development, an information technology company that was ultimately acquired by a leading company in the SMB computing segment from 2000 to 2008. This was truly an incredible recounting of Lazurite's journey, of Eugene's first principles systematic approach to solving seemingly impossible problems, and what the operating room of the future will look like. So please enjoy my conversation with Eugene Malinskiy. Well, Eugene, thank you so much for coming on today. Really appreciate your time and looking forward to diving in here to the work you're doing with Lazurite off the bat of quite a series of public and really exciting developments. So very much looking forward to this. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Your show's awesome. I've been a big supporter, and it's in my podcast directory. And I absolutely love all the conversations that you have. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Well, hopefully you'll enjoy this one as much. Well, I'd love to start, and we'll work our way towards the present day here, but just with an overview of the arc of your career, your personal background, and what drew you to the world of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, fantastic. The long arc of my life is actually more like a couple different arcs that I was very happy to be able to join together about a decade ago. So I've always had this let's call it entrepreneurship streak in me. A large part of that actually comes from my dad, who used to have his own company, actually a number of his own companies. So I've always sort of learned that entrepreneurship is this sort of exciting, you can almost say third way of being in the world, working in the world, and being able to make an impact on it. So I've actually had my first company when I was 16. So in high school, then had another company in college, then had a third company and then ultimately 2 medical device companies, this being the second. So I've always had this sort of entrepreneurship streak in me. I love the ability to sort of make your own path, make your own way, and to do it in a way that isn't necessarily how everybody else does it. So I've always loved being able to do that. So that's sort of arc one of my life. Arc two of my life has always been this science, technology. We can just come out and say that I'm a giant nerd.
Just put it on the table.
Hey, look, is the truth. um, but it's actually been right. Like I'm fascinated by the natural world, by the technical world, and I've always sort of my educational pursuits largely have ended up in chemistry, biochem, engineering, did a little bit of work in pharma. So all sorts of sort of chemistry, technology, that's sort of on the boundary. So right, some of my favorite subjects were the biochemistry, or right, I have a BME degree from CSU, and that's another interdisciplinary degree as well. So I've always been fascinated by that side of the world. And then I've had a passion for medicine. And so that's been the third sort of arc of my life is I love patient care. I am very excited about being able to help the patient, being able to help the physician and the staff. I was an EMT at one point in time. I did work at the Cleveland Clinic. I've sort of volunteered when I could. So I have this medical side. And for large portions of my early career, I could only ever really combine one or two of those. So I had a couple IT companies. And obviously that combines my love for the technology, that combines my love for entrepreneurship. I wasn't able to sort of combine my love for medicine in that sort of was its own separate job, which I still love, but it was its own separate thing. Or I would do something only medical, or I would only do something in a technology space. And then following my BME degree, I sort of had this aha moment where I saw that I could finally combine the medicine, the technology and engineering, and the science, and the entrepreneurship. And so that was sort of the it's crazy to say that, right? Because I'm not even 30 yet. I'm like, that's the culmination of sort of the three paths of my life. I don't know where I'll end up in 10 or 20 or 50 years, but at least at that point, that was sort of a wonderful place for me to be, because I finally felt like I had found this niche where my interests and my passion and my education all combined. And that was just awesome. It was awesome feeling, and it was really sort of led to a lot of passionate, good work, and happy to do the good work that sort of, I can't say expected out of me, but happy to do the sort of good work that I want to do, that I want to have a good, successful project or a product. I want to make sure I still also call out. So since this is very much a Cleveland podcast, I want to make sure I call out my other alma mater, which is John Carroll, where I was an undergrad. JCU set the sort of, I'd say, foundations for everything that came later. The sort of liberal arts, the true liberal arts education, the ability to pick and choose and do the things that interested me, like, for example, philosophy minor, nothing to do with what I was actually doing, but sort of allowed me to expand my mind and let me think and taught me to think in new and novel ways. So I want to make sure I call that out. And then obviously CSU, I already said, was one of the schools I went to for my postbac.
Always good to ground it back here in Cleveland. Maybe if you could take us through, at the convergence of those three areas, what was the epiphany that you had? Talk us through that aha moment.
So I'm sort of finishing up my biomedical engineering degree at CSU, and I'm spinning up yet another company. called DragonID because I sort of see this market need. Like doctors are saying, hey, wouldn't it be great if there was a device that did blah, blah, blah. Or there was some talk because there was a collaboration between CSU and Clean Clinic Innovations, and there was collaboration there. And so I heard a lot of discussions on, hey, wouldn't it be great if XYZ device existed in order to help the surgeons and help the patients. And that was sort of the first sort of sparkle of, there might be something there, this combination of devices. So started up DragonID, moved into Launch House. Now this is old Launch House, not OC, not OC Launch House with that was around for like the 6 months. This is Launch House on the road, so the second iteration of it. Fantastic group of people there. That was a lot of fun. Moved into Launch House, sort of put a little shingle out, and then used connections and introductions in order to start, in essence, soliciting business. Gained a little notoriety, if you want to call it that, both regionally as well as nationally. Ended up working on some very cool projects and products. And that sort of was the big aha moment, which is I finally get to, and this was a cardiac project, so I can mention that. Like, this was a cardiac project, and there was this very defined need, and there's no easy solution. And to get to the solution required a lot of hard engineering work, a lot of hard thought from the science side, but also you needed to know medicine. You needed to know how the patient journey took the patient to where they needed this potential future device. You needed to know the physician's journey, like what did the physician do? How did the disease progress? So it was this sort of like amazing, like, oh my God, I get to say, like, I get to use my medical knowledge, my medical know-how. I get to be in that operating room. And then I get to do the good science, the good engineering, and I get to combine that, both of those, finally, with entrepreneurship, sort of running your own ship, trying to go somewhere where you want to go. And that was sort of the big epiphany, and that was wonderful. That early success, and then sort of started generating a lot of friends and folks in the industry who liked the work we were doing, who saw the potential in the company, in myself personally. We were nominated, or I was nominated, for the Forbes 30 Under 30 in manufacturing for, again, a cardiac project. Ended up winning it. That put us more solidly on the map. Tremendous fun after that, because all of a sudden now I had to like field phone calls and answer all sorts of weird, interesting questions. Like, hey, can you do this thing for me? I'm like, who are you? What are you doing? But that led to this very interesting sort of process where, and I'm going to sort of keep coming back to process probably a lot during this conversation, where this is sort of the first time I'm putting together this repeatable process for how do you really make a new medical device, right? Because what would start happening is we would have a physician or a surgeon or a nurse or staff come to us, or reach out to me personally, and they'd be like, I have this brilliant idea. I think I know how to fix it, and all I need you to do is a couple of small minor things, and then we can go and make a whole lot of money. The reality was obviously far more complicated than that.
Not quite so small, not quite so minor.
Not quite so small, not quite so minor, not quite so fast. But it was actually very interesting, because what that led to is this sort of process where a surgeon would have an idea. And either they would call me, or the institution would call me, or a big company would call me, and they'd say, look, we think there's an idea here. Can you explore it? And I'd say, absolutely. But then I'd put the idea to the side. I'd actually almost forcibly ignore it. And I'd go and I'd talk to the surgeon, and I'd say, Doc so-and-so, tell me what your problem is. Please do your best to explain to me where you see there being a need. And then I'd say, okay, so after the explanation, show me. And that would very frequently lead to them taking me to the operating room. And I'd say, okay, show me the procedure, walk me through the procedure, and then do it again, and then do it again, in order to sort of understand what problem they're having. Then I'd say, okay, I think I'm starting to see your problem. Let me put this aside. And then I'd call up another doc, maybe one I had worked with before, maybe one I had not. And I'd say, Doc, there's this interesting conversation. I don't want to reveal anything for obvious reasons. Is it okay if I come in and I just shadow your surgery for a couple of days? I want to see you perform this particular surgery, this particular cardiac surgery, or this particular orthopedic procedure, or this sort of intervention. And generally speaking, they'd say yes. They'd be very excited to have somebody in the room who they can just talk to and unload and listen to them. So generally, the answer is always yes. which, by the way, led to fantastic future connections, which I was then able to use. But it was kind of great because people love telling you what they're doing, how they're doing it. And then I would sort of listen to that procedure, listen to that process, and I'll be honest, about 50% of the time, if not more, what I discovered after doing a couple of these observations with multiple docs is that the original problem isn't what the original doc thought the problem is. It was something else, as in they maybe misidentified the problem. Unfortunately, sometimes it's because they're actually not doing something right, which happened a few times. And those were difficult conversations to have. But sometimes they would be onto something. And that would sort of be okay, this is wonderful. This sparked a conversation, this sparked a discussion. Now, let's take whatever it is that you have now that we're past the stage of, I think this is a problem, let's look at your proposed solution. And we would sort of work on the proposed solution and say, maybe that's not quite solving the problem. And this was sort of a repeatable process. And then we would actually go and try to solve the problem. And if we could show that the problem was solvable by a very quick prototype or by modifications of it, we would then try to transition that back to the surgeon or the institution and say, look, I think there's something here. Here's feel free to take this now to the next step. And sometimes they come back to us and they'd say, well, can you guys do the next step? So all of that is wonderful. However, if you notice, there's a key element in all of this missing, which is that none of this was actually owned by us. Right? So we were doing good work for other people. And so, because it's a consulting company, right? So DragonID was a consulting company. And ultimately, that is not where I wanted to go. That's not where I wanted to end up. Could have continued growing that very well compensated world, lots of companies in that space, lots of sort of unique niches that can be occupied in that space. But ultimately, it's doing other people's work, and you never sort of really got to see the whole process. You never really got to put your name on it. And I wanted sort of to be part of the whole life cycle, which is a very different sort of company. And the opportunity, so as I'm sort of thinking this, which leads to the sort of the next step, which is what became Lazurite. I'm in an operating room, orthopedic operating room, for something completely different. I'm there observing an orthopedic case, a minimally invasive arthroscopy case, in fact. For the listeners here who don't know what that is, the very sort of simple explanation is they make a couple small incisions in your knee or your shoulder, and they stick a camera into one of those incisions. They stick a tool into another one of those incisions, and they do whatever it is that they need to do in order to make your joint feel better.
I was going to ask, so thank you.
No, absolutely. Yeah. So arthroscopy is one of a class, is part of the class of the larger world of endoscopy procedures. So minimally invasive procedures, which are only growing, right? This is a huge market. It's only getting bigger as we move more and more procedures that used to be, number one, in the hospital, number two, sort of big open procedures where we are cracking you open and then you're taking a long time to recover, into these minimally invasive, minimal portal procedures. And arthroscopy is in that category. And arthroscopy happens to be an orthopedic version of the endoscopy. So, if anybody, I'll sort of say one more thing. If you hear like an athlete had like an ACL tear, or they did a peak in their shoulder or their knee or their elbow, chances are they used some sort of a minimally invasive procedure to do that. And in order to do that, you need a camera and you need a light, because obviously the inside of the body is dark. FYI.
This makes sense.
In order to do any procedure, right? In order to do any minimally invasive procedure, right? You need fundamentally two things. You need a light into the body, and you need video out of the body. And so I'll talk more about sort of the background of arthroscopy later, but that's sort of a good guidepost. So I was in this procedure, in this operating room. They were set up for a procedure. There was a patient on the table. Patient was intubated. They were virtually seconds from starting the procedure, and PA, a physician's assistant, walked by the surgical table and tripped and fell and took a really hard fall in the operating room because of the cables that connect that video camera and that light back to this big surgical tower that's in the room. So imagine this, right? Like this picture. You're an observer in this OR. You're about getting ready to see a surgery start, and all of a sudden, what is supposed to be this never event happens, where a member of the surgical staff unintentionally trips and falls, hurts themselves on these cables that are laying across the patient and that are sort of hanging down, and sort of the world freezes. And you're like, what did I just see? Right, this is not supposed to happen. This is supposed to be a never event. And then the engineering side turns on, and you're like, okay, this can't be happening, right? So this is, put in context, 2014, 2015, right? Like wireless is everywhere, right? Cell phones are everywhere. We've solved the wireless problem, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth. Your cell phones, your home phone is cordless now. Your grandma is calling you on the cell phone. So like there's cameras in our pockets that are cordless, wireless, with a battery. How is this still a thing? And then sort of the world snaps back. The PA is laying very injured. The surgery is canceled. The patient's wheeled back. It's just a disaster. And then you're sort of like just standing in this OR and you look around and you're just like, I just did a count. There's like 20, 40 wires on the floor, on the ceiling, across the patient. Like, why hasn't anybody said anything? Like, is this a problem? Was this something that was a one-off? And it turns out that it's not. That this
Wow.
is fundamentally a problem. And that led to what eventually became ArthroFree, which I'm very happy to report that as of a few weeks ago, received its FDA approval. And it is the first product in what we expect to be a whole family of products that solve this problem and other problems in the operating room.
Wow, what an incredible founding insight story. I mean,
Dramatic enough?
yeah, fantastic. I mean, no, it's really incredible. Maybe kind of take us through, like, had no one asked this question before, it turns out this is a real problem that people are aware of, but maybe not talking about. Is it just a consequence of this is the way that we have done it, and this is, it works well enough? What's going on there?
Yeah, so that's almost exactly what it was. The little side commentary I'll give here is, which I think your listeners have heard before, had I only known how hard it was going to be, I would have probably still done it. So let's walk through this. So day one of the ideation here is, let me take out a back of the napkin. Let me run the actual math. Right, this is the engineering brain turning on. Let me run the actual math on, is this possible? Can I transmit wireless video in a safe way across an operating room in order to achieve the video quality I want to achieve? Yes, check. Okay, so nothing physics stopping you there. Can I do that with lighting? Interesting numbers came up, but let's pretend for a second that the answer is yes. Can I power this off of a battery? Interesting numbers come up, but the answer does seem to be yes. So there doesn't seem to be anything in physics that's wrong that's stopping this from happening. Then I go and I start asking physicians, and I'm like, so I kind of come back to this process, right, that I had now established.
Right.
And I start asking physicians, so this is day two. Hey, is this a thing? Is this a problem? And the very, very small circle of people. And the answer is virtually universally, oh my God, yes, I've been talking about this for the last 15 years or 20 years. I've told that this is a problem that needs to be solved to all of the large companies, and I'm not getting anywhere. I hope you can solve it, but it may be impossible, or I'm happy that you're even talking about it. So that's sort of okay. So there's a check mark there. This is something that is needed. So a product market, very early product market fit. So what's next in the process that I had now developed and defined is, we have a problem, we have a potential solution. Let's actually make the prototype. Things get dicey here really quickly because you really start getting into like, well, this is where I start understanding why it's hard. So the first fundamental problem that we had to solve was the light. So I mentioned earlier the light. To put this in context, right now, in order to get enough light into the body, you have, right, to do this minimally invasive procedure. I don't care if it's orthopedics, if it's whatever, endoscopy, GYN, urology, regardless of what it is, if it's a minimally invasive procedure, right, you need that light into the body. The way that they do it right now is there's a box that sort of sits on a table or on a shelf, And it's a pretty large box. It's a 400 watt LED or xenon bulb, or multiple, if it's LEDs, it's multiple bulbs, that is then connected to this really thick, very long fiber optic bundle. If you can imagine it, it's like it's thicker than your thumb. And this fiber optic bundle then goes across the surgical site and into the actual bit that's going to go into the body. And so it's kind of like hanging over the floor. It's laying on top of the patient. And this thing causes operating room fires, like 600 to 800 recorded operating room fires per year.
Wow.
Because of the inefficiency in the system, because of how hot it gets. There's a whole lot of other problems with the current light sources, but I'm sort of coming back to sort of the engineering. I'm up against the fact that I have this giant box that is bright enough where it can literally set a drape on fire, or it can like burn a patient. And it does set drapes on fires, and it does burn patients. I need to be able to produce that much light in a tiny space, because this is a box. Like this is the size of, I don't know, like your old, for anybody here, like your old VCR box. Like that's the size of this light box.
Hefty box.
Yeah, it's like an Xbox or a PlayStation. It's hefty. You need to be able to take that amount of light, shrink it into something much smaller without burning a patient and without draining power, because I'm trying to make something wireless. And so I try to do this with LEDs, and I go and I try even the most sort of high-end, like automotive grade or industrial grade LEDs that have all of these features. And I run into this problem where if it's bright enough, it's drawing too much of my battery. And it's also potentially so hot that I'm back to the problem of it burning a patient. And so this was sort of the big potential failure, because I could have easily just given up and be like, okay, this is a not solvable problem, because I can't actually produce enough light into the body. But I don't stop. I solve the problem. I solve the problem in a very unique and innovative way, where we make our own non-LED light source. And this actually leads to our first major patent publication, because it is so novel, it is so original, nobody's done this. We were able to combine a laser and a volumetric remote phosphor system in order to produce light, in essence, more efficiently than the equivalent LED. And we were able to do it in a way that was cold, so that there's no chance of burning the surgeon or the patient or the drape. And it also did not draw so much power. To put it in even more context, I said 400 watts, right? 400 watts is your current LED or xenon light source. Ours is under 4 watts. 2 orders of magnitude less power in our light in order for it to produce the amount of light needed to look inside that joint or that cavity. So
that's incredible. Again,
pretty cool. Pretty freaking cool. Next, so I literally had a prototype, and there's pictures of this floating around. I literally had a prototype of just the light. Took it to Cleveland Clinic with Dr. James Williams, who at that time was the head of Euclid Hospital Orthopedics. He was the team doc for, at the time, the Indians, the Guardians.
Yep.
Also a number of other professional sports teams here in town. Incredibly well-respected, minimally invasive surgeon with a deep connection pool here locally, but also because he had so many fellows work through his program nationally. had him in an operating room with a cadaver, tried our light source, and as soon as we were able to see inside the joint, Dr. Williams goes, "You have just probably solved this problem that we," and at this point, right, we told him what we're doing. He's like, "You have probably solved the problem that we have all been talking about for the past 15 years. I am so happy to have seen this." And then he asked, "Can I be a part of sort of this story? I want to help. I want to help on design. I want to help on anything I can help on, because I love the team. I love the vision. This is absolutely something that needs to happen, and I would be sad if I wasn't part of that story." And we said, "Yes, of course." and that was the first of sort of this journey that I then took across the country. Again, going back to the fact that I had these physician connections, I had these other sort of industry connections who put me in touch with other physicians. I had a very early prototype. I had this light source, and I had this idea, right? This vision of a wireless minimally invasive camera system. I went and I sold this idea, and the docs who all saw it said, "This is wonderful." I came back. I worked on it a little bit more. I went out again. And that is actually how I was able to raise my initial money. So the vast majority of our initial fundraise actually came from minimally invasive orthopedic surgeons coast to coast, some here in town, but mostly on the East Coast and West Coast, who saw what we were doing, understood that vision, have been wanting something like this for a long time. And I'm showing them, at least at this point, a very early vision with some very, very rough prototypes, that this is achievable, that this is possible. And we were able to raise some money. We then used that to go ahead and solve some additional problems. So won't spend too much time on it, but for example, the battery and powering our device was difficult because we are using a battery. We needed a safe way to power our device that could be sterilized. And we actually turned to a magnet and NASA here in town. And we were part of a competition. We won that competition. We earned some time with NASA here in Cleveland, and they were wonderful enough where they, in essence, said, "Look, here are the batteries we use on satellites. Here's how we have protection circuitry put around them. If you do this, you are pretty much going to be okay for an operating room." And so we were able to take their know-how and their expertise, again, coming back to the Cleveland connection, and we were able to take all of that and really combine that with the light, and now we had a battery. The wireless bit was a third significant technical challenge, and this took us on and off probably around 4 out of the 7 years to solve. So first we had to solve the fact that the regulatory body, so in our case the FDA, doesn't necessarily like Wi-Fi. So we had to solve and use a non-Wi-Fi system. So we ended up using a military-based system, UWB. I'm not going to spend too much time there, but suffice it to say, we had to solve a lot of problems on both the implementation of that wireless, as well as the security, as well as things like latency, right? The doctor, when they hold this wireless camera in their hand, they are not looking down at the patient. There's nothing to see there. What they're doing is they're looking at a screen that's opposite them, and that's giving them the live image from inside the patient. When the physician and the surgeon is moving their hand and there's too much latency between that hand movement and what they see on the screen, they're not going to accept the technology. So we had to solve a lot of that. So the combination of the light, the battery, the wireless individually was very difficult. Combining them was more difficult still. We've been blessed with a fantastic team that we've been able to build on that helped us do that, and also our investors on being patient with us. And then so beyond the initial round, we then raised Series A. Again, some local money. Fortunately for us, but unfortunately for Cleveland, most of the money did come from the coasts. And then we finished our Series B about this time last year, actually. And that was the largest funding to date. And that was wonderful. Again, most of our original investors keep coming back because they see the vision, they want the vision. They've been very happy with us. So we've been very fortunate to have even our original physicians come back throughout the growth of the company.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible journey from product discovery, a poor PA tripping in the room, to figuring out first principles physically, is this possible, to figuring it out along the way and getting the buy-in and really painting the vision for what it sounds like the future of operating rooms is going to look like.
Yeah, no, we very much expect that this is going to be the future of the operating room. And so fast forward 7 years. Obviously, it took a little bit longer than we expected, cost a little more money than we expected. These things tend to do that, unfortunately. But I mentioned this earlier, but we just received our 510K FDA. And to put this into sort of as a congratulatory note to our regulatory team and sort of the external partners we work with, generally speaking, between sort of FDA submission, FDA approval, there is 4, 5, 6 more months that happen. We got our approval in exactly 90 days.
Wow.
And that just sort of goes to the fact that throughout this entire process, we've had sort of the regulatory side. So I keep talking about engineering, but in order to create a medical device, you have to have a very in-depth regulatory process. You have to have paperwork coming out the wazoo, unfortunately.
Oh, I'm sure.
And it has to be perfect. And so every step of the way, we've had our regulatory team make sure that we've been on the right track. So when we were ready to finally submit to the FDA, after all of our testing, after all of our development, the process through the FDA, while nail biting, was incredibly fast and incredibly smooth.
Wow. So you have now something with approval, with buy-in, with momentum. What happens now? You can now take this to market. You can start selling it.
Yeah, and so we've actually started doing that, right? You're not allowed to do that until you have FDA clearance. So we've been very fortunate now that we have FDA clearance. So we are building up our internal team. So we're going to have a relatively small internal sales team. We're going to have an external distribution team. And we are, as I sort of mentioned, we are very fortunate to have a tremendous amount of surgeons here at Cleveland Clinic and UH from around Ohio, but also around the country, who have been our champions and our partners and our supporters, who now are saying, look, we've been sort of behind you this whole way. We would love to be your first locations that ArthroFree is installed in. So we're starting to set that up. And then beyond that, we're starting to go through a relatively accelerated sort of sales process and showcase process. We are going to be doing, we've already done some, let's call it example trials, which we are going to have data off of. So we're going to be showing data. None of this was required for the FDA, but we are nonetheless doing some data collection showing that the industry, that the surgeons want our device, that it is, hopefully we're going to collect enough data showing that it really fits into their workflow and all sorts of other things. So as we sort of expand our reach and as we start putting ArthroFree into facilities, we're also going to be doing a lot of data collection in order to show that this is very much a surgeon-driven product. The surgeons want this. We put it in their hand. They say, I've been waiting this my whole life. But I also want to be able to showcase them to the nurses and the facility and the purchasing folks that beyond just the surgeon saying that they want this, there is an economic benefit, there is a safety benefit, there's all of these other things that by us eliminating these cables, we have also solved these other fundamental problems that you currently have in the operating room, and that we are hopefully at the end of the day, something that is safer, potentially cheaper, potentially even faster than what you have right now.
Wow. Yeah, it's very exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So as you think about, where you are now, the journey that it's taken to get here, what are you kind of most excited about looking forward over the next year? And, how are you thinking about what comes next?
Yeah, I'm most excited about a few things. So one is we are in the process of building these partnerships and relationships. And we actually announced one of the first a few weeks ago, and that's actually with university hospitals. Again, another local shout out. UH Ventures has been fantastic to work with. They've been great partners. We are really looking to build on that relationship. Some of the trials that I mentioned earlier, we're looking to work with them to conduct some of those. But we're looking at this as sort of a long-term relationship. So we have a couple others that are sort of in the pipeline. So developing these relationships is incredibly both important to me, but also exciting because it just helps. It helps our vision, but it also helps the institutions. It's really sort of a win-win for everybody involved. So that's one. Number two, obviously the market entry, the sales, everybody's looking for that hockey stick. We hope to get there as well. But we're honestly, right, so for myself, right, as the original person sort of behind all of this, it's sort of hard to relay how excited it's been 7 years, and I will finally get to see ArthroFree be in that operating room, be used by our surgeons, and I'm gonna see it start to provide those benefits that I saw the need for 7 years ago. That it's just an indescribable feeling. So that's another thing I'm obviously very excited about. And then three is we have a pipeline. We've developed, so with the light engine, which by the way we call the Meridium light engine, that is a fundamental technology. We have a product portfolio that is going to incorporate a lot of that technology. We have some other things we're working on, and I'm just very excited to sort of see where we end up with our product portfolio. And we're going to look for the next products to enter the market not too long from now.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to see what impossible things you figure out how to make possible as well. An incredible story, really. In retrospect, and I think you've kind of spoken to this a little bit already, but to just kind of bookend the whole journey here, what is kind of the impact that you hope to have looking back?
Right, absolutely. So I So we have sort of a corporate company impact where, right, we want to have this impact of a million lives, right? We want to be impacting patients. We want to impact surgeons, staff. We really want to fundamentally, sort of as a company, do good for the world and provide the tools that can help the surgeons and the staff treat their patients better, and for the patients to have better outcomes. So that's the one side of that impact, and I think that kind of all the other stuff kind of is under that, right? So I want to see safety improve. I want to not have operating room fires. I don't want to see another PA trip and fall in an OR because of a cable, right? Like it just shouldn't happen. And this is sort of exciting, right? Like whenever we show ArthroFree to up and coming docs or residents or interns, right? They sort of they get it. We don't even have to tell it to them. Like they look at it, they're like, oh yeah, it's wireless. Of course it's wireless. Why wouldn't it be? Without knowing that there's like 30 years worth of it not being wireless. And so I'm very excited about that impact and the fact that we are slowly but surely going to change the paradigm in the operating room. This is the first of what we should all expect is going to be multiple things that sort of move us away from technology that was great technology in 1985, but we can do a lot better now.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to seeing what y'all come up with. We'll close it out here with our closing question that we ask everyone on the podcast, which is not necessarily for your favorite thing here in Cleveland, but for a hidden gem, something that other folks may not necessarily know about.
Oh, absolutely. So I have two. So one is the public library. So for those folks who have never visited, please visit your local branch. But better yet, go visit the downtown branch. You would probably be surprised by the technological know-how and sophistication of what we actually have in our public library system, which I think has won numerous awards over the years. But for example, there's a 3D print shop downtown. You can check out things that, not just books, but all sorts of materials that you wouldn't normally think about. I think it's a nice retreat, and it's a fantastic public free sort of facility that we have, or a service, or it's beyond both of those things. They really are a key anchor institution in the region. That's one. And then another one, if you are a nerd at all who likes to do things with their hands, I very much recommend the Case Western, I believe officially is the Case Western Sears ThingBox. But the ThingBox is an amazing creator space on the Case campus, just down the hill from like Little Italy, which has everything from really incredibly sophisticated 3D printers to a full-on machine shop with more tools than you probably would think they do. And then they have chambers and all sorts of fun toys that you can play with. So anyways, it's kind of a little bit of a hidden gem. Unless you're kind of in the know, you don't tend to know about it. I highly recommend Googling it and making a little pilgrimage. The space itself is awesome, but just the amount of tools that they have for all sorts of makers, right? Not just folks who are doing 3D stuff. Like I believe they have resources for like knitting and sewing and all sorts of stuff. So please make a pilgrimage. They're absolutely wonderful. And the vast majority of it is either free or incredibly cheap.
Both excellent hidden gems there. Well, Eugene, thank you so much for coming on and for sharing really the incredible story and journey that you've been on.
No, thank you for having me. Off the cuff there. Sorry for it being so long. You got me all worked up.
I this level of depth and getting into the weeds and how you've just thought about this problem, it really fascinating. So I appreciate it. I imagine other people will as well.
Maybe not so much. We'll see.
Well, if folks have anything they would want to follow up with you about, what would be the best way for them to do so?
Yeah, so reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's always an easy favorite. Another one is if it's a official sort of company communication, please use the email contact@lazurite.co. That is LAZURITE.co. If you want to reach out to me directly, it is Eugene, EUGENE @lazurite.co.
Awesome. Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
That's all for this week. Thank you for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show. So if you have any feedback, please send over an email to jeffrey@layoftheland.fm or find us on Twitter @podlayoftheland or @sternhefe, JEFE. If you or someone you know would make a good guest for our show, please reach out as well and let us know. And if you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes or on your preferred podcast player. Your support goes a long way to help us spread the word and continue to bring the Cleveland founders and builders we love having on the show. We'll be back here next week at the same time to map more of the land. The Lay of the Land podcast was developed in collaboration with the Up Company LLC. At the time of this recording, unless otherwise indicated, we do not own equity or other financial interests in the company which appear on this show. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of any entity which employs us. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.